Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a very short podcast on President Trump's dramatic announcement that effective immediately, the United States will no longer be bombing Yemen, that the United States has come to an agreement with the Houthis that the Houthis will no longer attack American ships, and in return, the United States will no longer attack the Houthis. As you know, the United States has been bombing the Houthis since the middle of March, accusing them of interfering with the right of navigation, interfering with international commerce. And the United States, which of course takes it upon itself to ensure that international law is supposedly observed, as been hitting the Houthis in order to get them to comply. Now, as you know, that the Houthis only did this in order to express solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, and in particular to hit Israel and all ships going to and going from Israel. And that's the only thing. I mean, the Houthis were not trying to interfere with international commerce. They were not interfering with navigation. It was just simply a way of expressing solidarity with the Palestinians by hitting Israeli ships. And the United States, that as is always often the case, decided that they had to step in to support Israel. Now, what's interesting about the Trump announcement, given that the rationale for getting involved here was as an expression of solidarity with Israel because it was being attacked by the Houthis, was that this agreement that it's come to with the Houthis pertains exclusively to the United States. There is no demand that the Houthis cease attacking Israeli ships, or indeed cease attacking Israel. Because the other day, somehow the Houthis managed to evade Israel's anti-missile defense systems and to land a missile somewhere in the vicinity of Ben Gurion Airport. And so on, in response, of course, Israel has launched bombing attacks on Yemen, hit the Sana'a airport. But the announcement of Trump said nothing at all about any Houthi cessation of attacks on Israel. It exclusively was about attacks on American shipping. So let me just show you how the New York Times described this. And here we have the story. It says Trump says, oh, go back, sorry. Yeah, Trump says the U.S. Will cease strikes on Houthi militants. It is unclear whether the Houthis were going to stop impeding international shipping, which was the objective of the American bombing campaign. Now, one should say right away that most international shipping has now essentially ceased using the Red Sea, and they prefer the going around the Cape route, so it's no longer even an issue. So really, the sole issue was ships that were heading towards Israel. And here we have says the United States and Houthis in Yemen reached a deal to halt American airstrikes against the group after the Iranian-backed militants agreed to cease attacks against American vessels in the Red Sea. President Trump and Omani mediators said Tuesday. Mr. Trump broke the news of the truce during an unrelated Oval Office meeting with Canada's Prime Minister, surprising even his own Pentagon officials. They just don't want to fight, Mr. Trump said, and we will honor that and we will stop the bombings. They have capitulated, but more importantly, we will take their word. They say they will not be blowing up ships anymore. So he leaves it vague, at least in this part of his comments. But when we get further on, it's clear that the issue is only that the Houthis will not attack American ships anymore. But attacks on Israel will continue. And this really is very, very interesting because Israel knew nothing at all about this. Israel was caught completely blindsided, even as it was bombing Yemen. At that very moment, Trump just essentially declared a ceasefire with the Houthis, and a ceasefire that only pertains to the United States. Essentially, Trump is telling the Houthis, well, you have a beef with Israel. Well, you're going to have to pursue your beef with Israel. Just don't hit us. And here we have the story goes on, but despite his claim of success, it remained unclear whether the United States had achieved its objective of stopping the Houthis from impeding international shipping after a costly 7-week bombing campaign. Well, we don't know. It's obviously been a very expensive campaign. It wasn't ever really thought through as to what the United States was hoping to achieve and whether it was ever likely to achieve these goals, because, of course, many other presidents, including his predecessor, Joe Biden, had tried to bomb the Houthis without a great deal of success. And it was even obvious when Trump announced these attacks on the Houthis, whether there was ever likely to be any particular success. And of course, there weren't. The attacks continued, as they were obviously likely to do so. And it was even clear from the Signal chat that was exposed thanks to Jeffrey Goldberg, that even the main participants in the decision-making process about these attacks on the Houthis, the main participants had their doubts that this was ever going to work. And the opposition was led most forcefully and most effectively and articulately by Vice President J.D. Vance. He said, what's the point of this? All we're doing here is pulling out the Europeans' chestnuts out of the fire. Why should we do this for them? They're the ones who are using the Red Sea, but of course they're not anymore. And of course, ships aren't using the Red Sea anymore. So what exactly are we trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to help? Well, of course, the only people who were being helped were the Israelis. Of course, J.D. Vance couldn't really admit that, or anybody in that meeting could admit that. So instead, they said, "Oh, it's all really about the Europeans. We're just the freeloading Europeans. We're trying to help them out, and this is why are we doing this? Why are we wasting our resources on helping out the good-for-nothing Europeans?" That's all that anyone dares to do. You can't say, "Hey, what are we doing, helping out Israelis?" But nonetheless, it was clear even in that conversation that members of the administration were having difficulties understanding the reasons for this bombing of the Houthis. Anyway, the Times goes on. The Houthis themselves stopped short of declaring a full ceasefire, saying that they would continue to fight Israel. And again, it's important to keep in mind, Trump didn't say anything at all about that the Houthis are not going to continue lobbing missiles. He never said that. He was exclusively that they're not going to attack American shipping. And Houthi officials and supporters swiftly portrayed the deal as a major victory for the militia and a failure for Mr. Trump, spreading a social media hashtag that read, Yemen defeats America. And then after Mr. Trump unexpectedly broke the news of the deal between the Houthis and the United States, Oman's foreign minister, Badr Abu Saidi, said his country had mediated the agreement. So that's Oman, which is mediating negotiations between the United States and Iran. And now the Oman seem to have mediated this deal between the United States and the Houthis. And as we'll see later, there's a suggestion that Iran itself was involved in these negotiations. And then he says, in the future, neither side will target the other, including American vessels in the Red Sea and Bab al-Mandab Strait, ensuring freedom of navigation and the smooth flow of international commercial shipping, he said in a statement on social media. Again, it's neither side. So it's Americans and Houthis. Nothing here for Israel. For his part, Mohammed al-Bukhaiti, a senior Houthi politician, said that if the United States halted its attacks on Yemen, the Houthis would halt their attacks on a smaller group, quote, American military feat and interest. So again, it's clear here, nothing at all here for Israel. However, Mr. al-Bukhaiti said the Houthis would continue military operations until Israel lifted its siege on Gaza, no matter the sacrifices, even if we have to fight until Judgment Day. So again, making it clear the attacks on Israel will continue, and that the United States is pretty much kind of washing its hands of this whole Houthi enterprise. And then Mohammed Ali al-Houthi, a senior member of the group, also described Mr. Trump's announcement as a victory for the Houthis, implying in a social media post that the agreement meant that the United States was no longer supporting Israel's battle against the Houthis. So the United States, yeah, obviously is supporting Israel, but it's no longer supporting Israel's battle against the Houthis. The United States is not fighting Israel's battle for Israel. And if you recall, we've talked over the past few days about Marjorie Taylor Greene's lengthy tweet in which she very much raised the question, why exactly is the United States fighting in other countries' wars for that country? And particularly as that country has nuclear weapons. There was no ambiguity as to whom Marjorie Taylor Greene was referring. So clearly, whether it's because of what Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's an influential figure within the MAGA world, maybe it's because of comments by internet influencer Charlie Kirk, but more he's the political organizer, activist, internet influencer Charlie Kirk, and of course Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon. Trump decided to say, well, we've done our bit. The Houthis said that they're not going to attack American shipping, and that's all that matters to me. And therefore, at least he's acting in conformity with America first rather than with Israel first. America first means that his primary concern is what's good for America and not what's good for Israel. And so, therefore, there's clearly a basis for an agreement here with the Houthis. And then Israel would have to make its decisions for itself. Then it says, two Iranian officials said on Tuesday that Iran used its influence with the Houthis as part of Oman's effort to broker a ceasefire and get them to stop firing on US ships. That's very interesting as well, because here, if true, that Iran got itself involved in these negotiations in order to secure a ceasefire, which means Iran is very serious about trying to get a deal with the Trump administration on denuclearization. We know that there have now been, I think, 3 rounds of talks. There may or may not be another round this weekend. But it's apparent that Steve Witkoff was involved in these negotiations with the Houthis, and Steve Witkoff is involved, obviously, in the negotiations with Iran. And so clearly, Iran wants to facilitate as much as possible some kind of a Middle East settlement involving Iran and the United States and whatever Iran's allies and the United States. So that obviously is a significant development. And then it says, for the past few weeks, Iranian officials have publicly distanced themselves from the Houthis, saying Iran has no control over the group and that their actions are a response to the war in Gaza. And it says, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah al-Khamenei said in mid-March that the Houthis act independently based on their own interests and personal views, and denied Iran had any proxy militia in the region. Now, I have to say that this passage somewhat contradicts the previous passage where it says Iran essentially secured this or used its, how do they phrase it? Two Iranian officials said on Tuesday that Iran used its influence with the Houthis to broker a ceasefire. That goes against it by saying, well, Iran has no control over the group. Well, if Iran is able to use its influence to secure a ceasefire, then obviously Iran does have control over the group. This is a good control in that they secured a ceasefire, but you can't say that, well, we have no influence on the group, but we used our influence in order to secure a ceasefire. And then here, still, national security experts cast doubt that an agreement would lead to a long-term cessation of attacks in the Red Sea. Mr. Trump's announcement came just hours after the Houthis released a statement that said it was fighting a holy war in aid of the wrong people, Palestinian people in Gaza, and confronting an Israeli-American-British enemy. The Houthis have described their attacks as an attempt to pressure Israel into increasing the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza, where more than 2 million Palestinians have struggled to obtain food and water, a blockade that has only deepened recently. Now, when we consider all of this, we can, I think, draw some conclusions. Now, obviously, those who are very skeptical, understandably so, very skeptical about Donald Trump and his intentions, his consistency, his steadfastness, say that Trump is mercurial. You know, he got this ceasefire. Why should this ceasefire last any longer than the ceasefire that he ostensibly secured in Gaza, that his own ceasefire that he then essentially sabotaged by endorsing Benjamin Netanyahu's most extreme goals. And so that the ceasefire that was supposed to inaugurate a 3-phase peace deal, well, it never even got to phase 2. So therefore, if Trump undercut his own ceasefire in Gaza, why should this ceasefire be taken any more seriously than the one in Gaza? And that's a very valid argument. What I would say in response to that is that Trump seems to differentiate between issues that pertain exclusively to Israel, as he sees it. So therefore, the issues pertaining to Palestine, which he leaves up to Israel and says, Israel can do whatever it wants. I mean, he's not going to interfere with that. He differentiates that, the Israel-Palestine issue, with other issues that are of great concern to Israel, and of course to Israel's Amen corner in the United States. That means that the powerful Israel lobby and all the various influences within the conservative movement, all the Ben Shapiros and the rest, the things that they are concerned with, such as Iran, such as navigation in the Red Sea, those issues, he says, well, they involve the United States. And where they involve the United States, ultimately the United States will make those decisions, and the decisions will be made by the Trump administration. They will not be made by Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. So however much Netanyahu and his acolytes in the United States may agitate on the issue of Iran, that deals with bigger strategic issues that very much involve United States national interests. And those decisions Trump will make. So while in Gaza, he just essentially washed his hands of the whole thing, which again raises the question why he ever got involved in that Gaza ceasefire. He got involved just a few days before taking the oath of office in January. He suddenly made the ceasefire his, even though he hadn't been very much involved in the ceasefire negotiations up until then. But now that he did it, and then he obviously seems to have thought better of it in coming days and then just abandoned it. But this, I think, is a little different. I think it was clear from the signal gate that the administration wasn't really all in on this caper of attacking the Houthis. There clearly were doubts there, which, as I said, were expressed very articulately by Vice President Vance, so wasn't really enthusiastic about it. And this is of a piece with Trump's distinct lack of enthusiasm for launching a bombing attack on Iran. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu has now made 2 visits. I mean, we're still in, just over 100 days into the new administration. Netanyahu has already made 2 visits to the White House, trying to get the United States to commit to bombing Iran. And twice, Trump has turned him down. And when he found out that Mike Waltz, his national security advisor, seemed to be plotting with Netanyahu to get the United States involved in this bombing attack on Iran, Trump removed him from the position and essentially demoted him to ambassador to the United Nations. So this deal with the Houthis, as well as his obvious reluctance to launch an attack on Iran, would suggest that there may well be some kind of a deal possible. A deal may be in the works with Iran that would involve denuclearization, but what it would involve Iran maintaining its civilian nuclear program. Something like that is possible. I'm not saying that it'll happen. There are obviously powerful forces in Washington that don't want this deal, and they may well prevail. But it's clear that, you know, if the story is true that Iran exerted influence on the Houthis to come to an agreement with the United States, and it seems like there's another round of talks between the United States and Iran are possible, maybe this weekend, then it could mean that the United States will secure some kind of a deal with Iran. I mean, that's obviously an optimistic scenario and may well not come about. But one should always maintain a certain openness to that possibility. Trump could indeed have gone on bombing the Houthis. Trump could easily have gone along with the Netanyahu Israel lobby plan to attack Iran. He hasn't done so. And he seems interested in continuing the negotiations with Iran. Now, there have been people saying that the reason why Trump came to this agreement with the Houthis is, that's because this has been quite costly. These missiles that he's lobbying, they cost a lot of money. But that may well be true. However, that's always the case with any peace agreement, which is why do parties come to peace deals? Well, when they realize that the costs of continuing something far outweigh any possible benefits that they can gain. In other words, this was an expensive enterprise, these attacks on the Houthis, and they weren't really achieving anything very much. And since Trump had no intention of invading Yemen, then essentially this was a waste of valuable resources to continue with this without any real prospect of any success. And then another argument presented is that we're on the eve of a Trump visit to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and it wouldn't look good for these for the Emirates and the Saudis that the United States president is visiting and the United States is bombing Yemen. I don't find this argument particularly persuasive. I don't think any of them care particularly about Yemen. Most states are able to keep things in separate compartments, and Trump would make the state visit, the pledge, friendship and partnership and whatever to Saudi Arabia, and the issue of Yemen doesn't even have to come up. So I don't find that argument particularly persuasive. I don't think the Saudis would lean on the U.S. president begging him not to bomb Yemen or threatening him that the proposed visit would be canceled. I don't think any of that happened. I think clearly Trump has seen that this is a fool's errand. There's been a fool's errand for one president after another bombing Yemen. And I think Trump is beginning to grasp that U.S. interests and Israeli interests do not coincide. It's in the U.S. interest to come to an agreement with Iran. It's not in the U.S. interest to launch a bombing attack on Iran because that's a very dangerous enterprise, and almost certainly will be counterproductive because were the United States to bomb Iran, Iran would almost certainly make a decision to leave the non-proliferation treaty, and therefore Iran would become a nuclear power. The very objective that the United States is seeking to thwart. So it would be the consequence would be the exact opposite of what Trump is trying to achieve. So I think he realizes that bombing Iran is the worst possible way of preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear power. So I think he's realized that. I think he's realized that United States and Israel are two separate countries, and they have very different interests. While he may support Israel in Palestine, however lamentable and deplorable that may be, he doesn't support Israel on any other issue outside of Palestine. So it's a hopeful sign, but it is just only a sign. It could indeed go either way. It could all end in disastrously. But if there's good news, then one should at least celebrate the good news and wait at least a little bit before the bad news comes, and then we can start lamenting the horrible nature of the world and of the Trump administration. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the cessation of hostilities between the United States and the Houthis, and we'll see what happens. Now, remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.